Commercial diving is one of the most treacherous and dangerous professions, which can often lead to devastating or even fatal outcomes. Yet it's been incredibly popular for decades. In 1979, a terrifying commercial diving accident was recorded, which claimed the lives of two men who succumbed to the extreme temperatures underwater. Join us on a journey where we explore the accident in depth, unraveling the truth about what happened, which startled the commercial diving community globally for years to come. In August of 1979, MS Wildrake, a diving support vessel, sailed into the North Sea with the aim of transporting a single anchor leg mooring, or SALM system, to the Thistle oil field. The vessel was owned by a Norwegian shipping company known as Anders Wilhelmsen AS. The Wildrake was equipped with state-of-the-art modern technology of the time. Coming with a built-in saturation diving system and the ability to transport heavy machinery, it was a perfect machine to conduct this mission. In the same year, prior to its journey, Infabco, a British commercial diving company, acquired exclusive rights to the Wildrake. Its saturation diving system was highly relied upon, and for June and July of 1979, Infabco personnel tested the system thoroughly for use. Det Norske Veritas, an internationally accredited registrar and classification authority, certified the system on the 3rd of July. Subsequently, in mid-July on the 17th, bell runs were conducted to ensure that everything worked perfectly and to prepare the SALM base for reattachment. More importantly, the extremely delicate saturation diving system faced several modifications during this period. Firstly, its swivel, which connected the lift wire to the bell, was completely removed and replaced with shackles instead. Secondly, its clump weight, which served as a backup recovery system, was also removed from below the bell, allowing the bell to be launched over the side of the vessel rather than the ship's moon pool. Lastly, the drop weights of the bell were lashed with nylon and attached to the bell frame, ensuring that they were not accidentally released. If they were, it could have resulted in fatalities. The Wildrake also had no bell stage, which would keep the bottom hatch out of the mud in case the bell is stranded on the seabed. All of these factors added up and eventually resulted in a catastrophe. Infabco secured a contract to repair the oil transfer station, and using this newly acquired ship, they planned on completing the job. The plan was to put two divers in the bell and drop them in the sea where they would weld, fit, and repair the SALM system. The bell was pressurized using the saturation diving system, allowing divers to stay under pressure inside the ship and avoid decompression stops. From late July until early August, Wildrake divers Richard Walker and Victor Guile had been in saturation, fixing the SALM buoy to the riser and preparing it for transport. They'd been in saturation since the 29th of July, working tirelessly to attach the SALM system. What they didn't know was that tragedy was about to strike and trap them underwater for hours. It was the night of the 7th of August 1979. Both Richard and Walker were 485 feet, or 148 meters deep in the North Sea in the Wildrake, working on the SALM reattachment mission. The diving bell had been on several dives beforehand during its testing phase, and this was perhaps the most important dive, marking the 30th dive since it was attached to the Wildrake. Since the SALM system was supposed to be attached to the base, the divers were supposed to go further down the sea to a depth of 520 feet or 158 meters. Unfortunately for the pair, this descent of the bell was going to result in a disaster that none of them imagined. As the bell lowered itself into the water, the transponder, which was the main source of communication between the bell and the Wildrake, became loose. There was no way to fix it, and as a last measure, the deck foreman had to cut it off completely. The divers were 520 feet deep in the ocean, and for a whole day, they kept working on the SALM system base. The next morning at 02:20 hours, Richard Walker noticed a weird sight. He'd been working on the SALM base outside the bell and noticed that the lift wire that held the bell was separated from the housing and hanging at a slant angle by the life support umbilical wire. A state of panic overcame him, and he had no other course of action but to report the emergency to his team on board. Richard entered the bell, contacted the team on the vessel and told his partner Guile about the wire breaking off. Guile also became anxious, waiting for some kind of positive response from the team above them. At a depth of 520 meters, they were now entrapped in the bell, hoping for a miraculous rescue. They closed the bell door, sealing it from the inside. The bottom door was left open as it opened outwards. The divers secured it back to the bell frame. Now the only thing left to do was to wait for a rescue. Controversy sparked as everyone, including the dive superintendent Peter Holmes as well as the dive supervisor Brian Reed, were led to firmly believe that the umbilical was a satisfactory and correct means of bell recovery. The bell was designed by Norwegian AS, and after this incident, the company denied what Peter and Brian believed. Furthermore, the DNV had only certified the bell and not the umbilical winch for its recovery. Brian Reed made a failed attempt to bring the bell up with the damaged umbilical, but it didn't work. The umbilical wheel located on the ship's davit was made up of one rubber tire sandwiched between two metal plates. During the attempt to raise the bell, the umbilical got stuck between the rubber tire and the metal plate. Lastly, they used a crane to raise the bell. However, this only added to the umbilical damage and resulted in heat, power, and hot water being cut off in the bell. Both divers were now resting in the bell on the seabed at a depth of 522 feet or 159 meters. Rescue missions began. Stena Welder, another diving vessel, came along to assist. However, its diving system required repair. The team used Wildrake's crane to raise the bell, while Stena Welder rescue divers attached a guide wire to it. At 0609 hours, rescue divers Phil Casey Smith and Eddie Frank of the Stena Welder vessel dove into the water. It took them over an hour to find the bell, which was moved away from the SALM base a few hours earlier. The divers met Walker and Guile, who gave them a thumbs-up signal, indicating that they were fine health-wise. Casey Smith utilized his time to direct the slack guide wire around the SALM base. However, he faced some challenges because Stena Walker constantly moved, dragging Casey Smith around the seabed. After more than an hour of struggle, he had attached the guide wire to the Wildrake bell. By 10:10 hours, slings from the crane hook were attached to the Wildrake bell. At this point, the Wildrake crane began lifting the bell at a 45-degree angle. They had no confirmation whether the bell was clear and safe to be lifted. Due to no visual, the bell hit the SALM base and the wire sling broke. After more than 2 hours at 12:20, the crane end emerged out of the water empty. The bell was once again lost, and Frank, the Stena Welder rescue diver, once again went into the water to relocate it. He was finally able to find it, lying in the water with both Walker and Guile trapped inside. Guile and Walker's movements had become frantic. They were now facing severe issues by being trapped at such depths. The hot water had been cut off. There was no power, and they had no chance of being rescued. Frank reported to have seen both the trapped men attempting to cut the ropes on the drop weights so the bell would float and resurface. Unfortunately, they couldn't cut the ropes completely and managed to free just one of the two weights. The strained divers were facing almost certain death, perhaps in the most tragic way anyone could ever imagine. Casey Smith, as well as Frank, had been in and out of the water several times by now. Exhaustion peaked, and they were eventually brought to the surface in the Stena Welder bell to regain energy. Divers Michael Mangan and Tony Slayman relieved them once out of the bell. It had been many hours since Walker and his partner were trapped in the depths of the North Sea, and rescuing them was extremely important as they could pass away at any moment given the circumstances. At 18:16 hours, 6 hours after the Wildrake crane failingly attempted to extract the bell, Michael Mangan found the Wildrake bell and attached it to the crane wire. 90 minutes later, they were successful in lifting the bell out of the water and docking it to the Wildrake saturation system. A medical expert, Dr. Morven White, was on board and had been put into saturation. His task was to examine both trapped men and to figure out the medical assistance that they would require. However, after being trapped for more than 24 hours deep in the ocean, Walker and Guile succumbed to the extreme cold and tragically lost their lives. Afterward, Dr. George Sheriffs, another onboard medical expert, declared Richard Walker and Victor Giles as officially deceased. Later that day, the bodies were sent to Aberdeen in Scotland, where autopsy results were received. According to the reports, both divers died of extremely cold temperatures in the bell and succumbed to a condition known as hypothermia. After their deaths, a large debate sparked all over Britain as well as the USA. People claimed that the accident was not just merely an accident, but had much to do with negligence on the part of Infabco Diving Services as well as Wildrake AS, the company that designed the bell. The Department of Energy inspectors, along with policemen, boarded the Wildrake vessel investigating the accident in deep detail. At the same time, Richard Walker's devastated widow, along with Giles' family, hired Gerald Stearns as their lawyer and filed a wrongful death complaint in the USA on the 30th of July in 1980. They named 10 people as defendants, including Infabco and Wildrake AS. And after 4 months, on the 29th of November in 1980, the Aberdeen Sheriff's Court found Infabco Diving Services guilty and indicted them on criminal charges as they were the employers of the deceased. The criminal trial began, and Infabco defended themselves on the ground that both Richards and Victor were employees of Offshore Coordinators Ltd., a company located on the Bank of Jersey and registered in the Isle of Man. On the 19th of December, Sheriff Alistair Stewart ruled that they were not the employer and hence persuaded the jury to find that they were not guilty. Subsequently, in May of 1981, the U.S. District Court of Los Angeles ruled that Infabco shall pay $475,000 in damages to Walker's widow, while paying $75,000 to Giles' family. Unfortunately, the court ruling had no force in the British courts and hence it was never applied there. The inquiry into the deaths didn't stop, and from the 11th of May to the 22nd of May in 1981, a fatal accident inquiry was held back in Aberdeen, Scotland. Richard's widow, Jenny, read a line out of Richard's diary in which he had written on the 7th of August 1980 that I don't even know if I'm going to get out of here alive. On the 13th of November 1981, Douglas James Risk, the sheriff, publicly stated his results and stated that when the trapped men removed the clump weights, it damaged the bell system severely and contributed significantly to the fatal outcome. Furthermore, he asserted that the contractors didn't take safety measures completely, and to keep up the speed, they descended the bell without any precautions. Finally, it was concluded that the divers could have been easily rescued had the rescuers assessed the risk completely and not tried to lift the bell using the crane without investigating any obstructions that may have been in the way. When the bell hit the SALM base, it fell again, breaking off from the line and resulting in hours of delay in the rescue. The aftermath lasted for more than a year. The families of the deceased were in shock, trying to find the answers and holding somebody responsible for the unfortunate deaths of their loved ones. In December of 1981, a reporter and former Member of Parliament, Brian Gold, appeared on a television broadcast called The TV Eye, which covered current affairs. The broadcast was named The Last Dive, and Brian Gold reported that during the dive and the accident, Brian Masterson and Joe Singletary, the manager of B&OC Offshore Construction, didn't have a good relationship. This may have added to the tragic loss in the accident. However, the truth behind this was never evaluated. 23rd July of 1982 was a particularly important date for the victims' families, as an Edinburgh law firm of Simpson and Marwick filed a lawsuit against 12 defendants, alleging that they had negligently acted and aided in the fatal outcome somehow. The lawsuit, filed on behalf of the Walker and Gile families, demanded damages of a considerable amount. However, the defendants caved and demanded to settle the suit. In October of 1986, 4 years after the institution of the lawsuit, the defendants agreed to pay a sum of approximately $422,000 to the Walker family. The Gile family was not as lucky, and reportedly they received a mere $8,000 deal. The defendants, however, made no admission of any guilt or wrongdoing as part of the deal. As for the vessel, the Wildrake was renamed Filinto Perry and was sold to the Brazilian Navy, where it eventually became a submarine rescue ship. The Wildrake accident records were kept in London for slightly over 20 years before they were reported to be lost in May of 2000. The disaster of the Wildrake vessel is proof that despite having expertise in commercial diving, the failure of equipment is always a huge risk and can lead to horrifying outcomes, often fatal. It also serves as a stark reminder to the manufacturers that customers, workers, and families of the workers trust them blindly to produce high-quality, duly checked machinery and equipment, ensuring the highest safety standards. In case of any oversight, disastrous results are seen which lead to heartbreak, depression, and loss of precious lives. Lastly, the accident is proof that rescue operations in such cases are vital and highly delicate. Taking extreme measures is only to be done after assessing the risks and challenges completely. Blind efforts only result in more catastrophic damage and come at the expense of human lives. Do you think the divers could have been saved if the rescuers didn't attempt to blindly lift the bell using a crane? Make sure you share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you liked the video, then make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon while you're at it so you're always notified as soon as our next video is uploaded. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.